everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healthy Politics, where we'll discuss the eternal intersection of healthcare in the United States and American politics. My name is Nick Carls. I'm a benefits attorney here at Holmes Murphy, and I'm also the director of EB Compliance. And with me is my esteemed co-host, Dan Bishop, former president of Holmes Murphy. I almost called you a vice president. I'm sure you were one of those at one time, but you also were a president at Holmes Murphy and our longtime healthcare strategist extraordinaire. How's it going, Dan?
Oh, good. We've got lots to talk about. This is going to be a good one.
We have material.
We have concepts.
Yes,
okay, we have material.
We have concepts of what this this episode should sound like, right? A concept of a plan. We'll talk about a concept of a plan in a little bit here, but then right before we started recording, kicking around where we would start, and I think we both agreed that a good place to start would be Kamala Harris's what she has out there posted currently, and what we heard from her during the debate.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple of kind of firmed up the direction that we had been talking about, kind of felt like where candidate Harris, I guess I'll return to Vice President Harris, candidate for President Kamala Harris, has kind of firmed up in writing and in the debate what I would call is a sprint to the middle from where her history as a Medicare for all person. It's got an interesting statement that she uses, is that she hasn't changed her values, but she has definitely on healthcare changed her beliefs and or position. So the real position at this point is kind of a protect and expand Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, by making the enhanced subsidies that came through COVID relief legislation that are set to sunset next year. She would like to make those permanent. So how do you make costs lower for people in Obamacare? You increase the subsidies. Doesn't really lower the cost in total, but it does lower what people would pay. So make those permanent. Fight big pharma. So that's kind of the second one, kind of take this, what we've done in Medicare, make that available to all. So kind of make big pharma the enemy is kind of the second position. And the third is relatively new in the presidential debate, but is consistent with Vice President candidate Walz's position of forgive medical debt. So I would take kind of the Harris-Walz position, three things: make the subsidies permanent in Obamacare, fight big pharma, make them the enemy, and work on forgiving medical debt. How you do that, I think, is an interesting figured out. But those are kind of the three big things. Really around, make it sound like people are going to spend less for healthcare is kind of the theme.
Yeah, it's hard because I don't love the saying or the phrase, the idiom of how do you boil a frog, right? You slowly turn up that heat. And so we were saying, okay, she's moved on with her position. She's gone to, embracing the ACA, moving away from Medicare for all. But I look at this and go, all right, so you make those enhanced premium subsidies permanent. Maybe you expand them a little bit more when you're doing that, right? Instead of just stopping there, you do it a little bit more. And that starts to feel a little bit more like universal coverage. If you're making it, significantly less expensive for a lot of individuals, well, then it becomes a no-brainer for them to go get their coverage, through the exchange. Right now, you're using private players, you're using private insurers to do it. But again, we're kind of moving that direction. Then when we start talking about canceling medical debt, well, someone's got to pay for it. And the deepest pockets that I'm aware of, at least the one that has the largest space on their credit card at this point, is the U.S. government, right? And so again, we're talking about, we're enhancing the ACA, we're looking at these other ideas, but they feel a lot like universal healthcare one way or another. It's just slowly moving that direction through different programs.
Yeah, I think it's a move from the in your face of the Bernie Sanders Medicare for all. I'll tell you, here we go. Let's just rip the Band-Aid. Where candidate for president 4 years ago, Kamala Harris, actually said, let's just move on. Let's get over it. So she has dramatically moved to, I think you're boiling the frog. Let's just dial up the water and continue progress this to more of that is definitely the theme of where her stance is. And polling would say that's kind of where the American people are. So it's trying to win votes, and it's easier to get some of those things done than massive legislation that puts a healthcare bullseye on your political career. It just
Well, and I think something that she talked about in the debate, and she didn't, I don't know how well she hit on this point of if you look at the number of uninsured in America, right, as a percentage, it's dropped. It's the lowest it's historically been since we had kind of our normal health insurance system, right? So, and that way the Affordable Care Act has done one of the stated goals, right, of providing coverage to everyone, whether or not it's affordable. That's another thing. One of the things she did talk about in the debate was, do you remember when people had to declare bankruptcy because they hit their? I don't know if she hit on the annual limit thing, but she's kind of getting that after that idea where I'm sure for a lot of you listening, we all remember going to the fundraisers and stuff like that because someone hit their lifetime or annual limit on their health insurance. The state didn't have a risk pool that they could get into, depending on the state, or they didn't qualify for it, whatever it was, and so people
Yeah.
were out of insurance, right? So you had to find ways to pay for it. And they'd get all this massive medical debt. And you've heard Walls talk about that as well with his mother, right?
Yeah.
On how she basically took on this massive amount of debt for her healthcare. And so it's just really hitting on this idea of, yeah, it's not great, but it's become pretty popular because we don't have as many. We still have them as many of
Yeah.
those fundraisers anymore. We have more people insured. So to your point, it's kind of this more popular program, which to kind of go to the next part of this.
Let
Whoops.
me hit one thing
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that. It is because I've got family history and personal in that, and my mom, who thankfully is still with us, is a 4-time cancer survivor.
Wow.
And she was in her early 40s when she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer for the first time.
Wow.
And in her job, she sold real estate. She was basically an independent contractor. For years, insurance for her was a massive issue because she was not insurable. And so she ended up in a state pool for insurance and was with the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan and was able to navigate that. But it was that kind of world where we had no universal pre-existing condition protections did create a lot of anxiety. I mean, it was in our family and able to kind of navigate that. But that's very popular with voters. I mean, if you say get rid of Obamacare and people interpret that is we go back to if you're sick you can't get insurance. America doesn't want that. That is the one thing even early in Obamacare that was very popular. Back to where you were saying that this is just a progress what's there rather than trying to replace it with something that's more universal. Is the Harris-Walls stance?
Right. 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 So it's become a little. There are popular provisions. It's becoming used, and it kind of puts former President Trump and the Republicans in a bit of a tight spot when discussing this. And we saw that very clearly during the debate, right? You're better at saying he has the concept of a plan for replacing the ACA. And I think just about everyone in America heard that and went, okay, so there is no plan.
Yeah.
And he said, he's not going to, it's not his goal to repeal it right away. Right. They have to have that plan. And so that it's just such a change, right? From 2015, as we're leading up to the 2016 election, where it was very clearly repeal, right?
Yeah. The man, it was powerful for elections for a good number of years, the Republican stance of repeal and replace. In my last book, I altered that and said what they really meant was repeal and erase because there was no plan. That was the problem and why with John McCain's famous thumb down vote in the Senate to repeal. Yep. The Republicans at that point really couldn't agree on, well, replace with what?
Yeah.
And there never has really been an agreed Republican replacement plan. Now you've got different members of Congress who've come out with plans at times, and they've had kind of entertaining titles of what they would be. But I do think that was a struggling moment for Donald Trump in the debate when pressed on that, because he effectively has been running for president, for 10 years, off and on. And to now say we have concepts of a plan, but he did very clearly in the debate say, if we can't come up with anything that's lower cost or better, then Obamacare stays.
Then it stays.
Yeah, that was kind of the default was, but if we don't have anything, then we're just going to keep going where we're going.
Yeah. And part of I mean, to kind of go back to that, 2015, 2016, and then when got into 2017, they were actually going through the process. One of the biggest issues they ran into is those popular provisions. No lifetime annual limits, no pre-ex. Well, that pretty much gets rid of underwriting. So as soon as you get rid of underwriting, there's a cost to that, right? There's a significant cost. And so then figuring out how do you bridge that gap was always going to be the tripwire. It was the thing that just wasn't going to work. One of the other things I think is really interesting is right before the debate, Donald Trump had talked about expanding coverage for IVF, in vitro fertilization, and saying that either the government or the insurers would pay for this expansion. So that way everyone could have access to IVF. Now, you and I hear something like that. What's the first thing that comes to your mind, Dan?
Cost increases. If you add provisions that often are not covered that are expensive, and costs go up. And I say that as my history as a benefit consultant, my clients were always anxious about cost increases.
Yes.
It's just pain point.
It's someone, as I would say, someone has to pay for it. And then we need that vehicle, right? So the vehicle that he's talking about is government or insurance. But then I also say, all right, but what are we taking to get to the airport? What's the first part of it of what's the law that we're going to add this into to make this happen, right? Because you have to have some way to enforce that. And the only one that I could think of is the Affordable Care Act. If you have again, Dan and I don't talk about this ahead of time. Yeah. We kind of try to keep it a natural here. I honestly cannot think of another way to cover in vitro fertilization, insurance, government, whatever, without just having it be an add-on provision within the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, thinking through it, if you could take that and say that is a pre-existing condition, pre-existing conditions are protected. And so therefore here is, I mean, there's always a pathway and to try to get it. But you're right. That's probably the most likely door that you could walk something in would be a pre-existing condition item.
Pre-existing or a listed state, very clearly stated essential health benefit, that would probably take legislation, but it would be popular legislation. I think at this point, you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of different representatives, senators, whatever, that wouldn't want to vote for that. And so we're in this kind of twilight zone situation where we have former President Trump talking about implementing an idea. And the only way to do that is through a law that he's now saying he wouldn't repeal or replace unless there's a better idea. And he said that he currently doesn't. And so that kind of gets to, I think we're going to go with this title. Dan, remind me again, what's the title?
Yeah. So here's you take all the debate and what's on, at least on the Harris-Walz website. The Trump website still doesn't really address healthcare, but you take what's out there and you go, okay, so Harris-Walz have moved from the left to the middle on this and saying, hey, we're just gonna protect Obamacare. And really what the Trump campaign, I haven't paid attention in the last week or so to Vice President candidate Vance, what he said on healthcare. I don't think he has said anything.
Very little. I haven't heard anything really.
It really comes down to the Trump stance on that is, hey, I got concepts, but really Obamacare is okay, so we're going to keep it. And so everything is boiled down in healthcare right now to Obamacare forever.
There it is.
at least until the next election. But I think that this is the Obamacare forever election in healthcare.
Yeah, and a lot can happen in 4 years. So we'll see what the conversation looks like as we're going into 2028. But I think that'll be the end of the conversation for today, right? Because we're coming up on our time, but we really do appreciate everyone joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it, or we hope you enjoyed it, that you join us for the next one. If you have questions, comments, or anything like that, feel free to reach out with your Holmes Murphy representative. They know to get in touch with us, and we love talking about this. So again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep. Have a good one, Dan.